Welcome to Mic Drop, the podcast where relevancy is irrelevant and we don't give a shit about your feelings.
Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome my next guest to the podcast. He is the host of the Modern Wisdom podcast. He's also the Calvin Klein underwear model that will unfriend you on your birthday. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Chris Williamson.
Hi, mate. How are you?
Good. I appreciate you coming. I have to ask the unfriending on the birthday thing. Where did that come from? And please tell me your take on that.
Basically, when Facebook used to be a big deal, that there would be, you accumulated people on your Facebook that you didn't actually know. It wasn't a thing that you did for friends, right? Before Instagram or Twitter, you didn't just have something where you could accumulate people that you'd met. And it just, I found out that as you went through people's birthdays, you would often find, oh, that's someone that I met once in a nightclub 5 years ago. I've never spoken to them. I can barely remember who they are. So you can just get rid of them. And it's a nice little way to keep on. It is a bit of a shitty move, I suppose. But it's like, happy birthday. I don't know you anymore. Yeah. But it's a thing.
Did that strategy come from something, or was it just something that you kind of
I've been a club promoter for 15 years. So I've run nightclubs. And one of the weapons that we had for filling nightclubs was a big Facebook account, which meant that managing Facebook friends, there's a limit of 5,000 Facebook friends, which most people don't get up to. But if you're aggressively adding everybody in your local area in a desperate attempt to get them to come to nightclubs, you sometimes hit that. So that was a strategy that we had. That was mostly for the boys. That was for the managers that worked for us, how to keep your friends list now. And the main reason for that was that once someone's 22 and they've left university, they're now off doing real world stuff. They're not coming and partying on a Wednesday. So they needed to delete people on their birthdays.
Yeah, that's a trip. All right, a little bit of lightning round. What is your favorite childhood memory?
Playing cricket down at Loughborough, which is the England Academy.
I still don't understand how the fuck cricket works. Can you give a Reader's Digest 30-second synopsis on how it works, or is that impossible?
I can do it. I can try. 11 players on each team. The team that is at bat has a number of wickets, so each player can be out once. That's by bowling through the little set of stumps, or by running them out, or by catching the ball. And the team plays until the batting team is out. That's 10 wickets through. The other team goes into bat. Whichever team scores the highest number of runs wins. You have boundaries, which is 4 along the ground, or 6 if it hits the boundary without touching the ground. But what you can sometimes have is games that have 2 sets of innings and a time limit. So you can have 5-day games of cricket. And this is why it's so brilliant, right? It's a game which is only played in fantastic weather. The slightest sign of rain and or darkness, the game stops.
Really?
It only exists during the most climate summer months for us here in England. And you can bring your own booze and sit on the grass on the sidelines. Pretty good game.
Wind? Will wind cancel a game?
I've never had a game cancel because of wind, but we don't have extreme weather in the UK. It's just sort of melancholy, miserable.
Yeah. How does it compare to Quidditch, in your opinion?
It's far less magical.
Yeah, I can imagine. What is the biggest difference from your experience and perspective between the UK and America? Like, what's the first thing?
Beyond the guns?
Yeah. I mean, I guess just generally speaking, what comes to mind?
So one of the big things I've realized since being here is that you guys, for all that people can accuse America of being the land of oppression and holding people down and prejudice and stuff like that, there is still a huge blue sky vision and helicopter thinking. People really believe that they can do things with their life and that they can raise up themselves and they can build businesses. In the UK, there's a huge sense of tall poppy syndrome. I don't know how many friends the people listening have got in the UK, but a lot of them, self-deprecating humor, satire, sarcasm, like that kind of is our shtick. And that doesn't just come from nowhere. That comes from what it's like in school. So if you start to deviate in school, if you start to do different things, a lot of the time people really sort of try and discourage you from doing that, which at the time feels a little bit sucky, right? It doesn't encourage or engender a sense of people believing that they can do whatever they want to do, be whatever they want to be. What that does mean when you grow up is that you've got your feet firmly planted on the ground, that you're very, very sort of grounded and you don't get beyond yourself. Now, conversely, what I see happening in America is that kids, when they're in school, you have real American hero stories of people that have built businesses, huge amounts of startups and entrepreneurs and stuff like that. And that means that kids believe that they can do a lot of things. They can grow up and do a lot. However, when they get into adulthood, sometimes certain types of personalities notice a delta between what they were promised as a child and what they've had as an adult. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is where some of the victim mentality can come from. We don't have that quite so much in the UK because your high hopes for your life were beaten out of you at the age of 5 years old in the school ground. Yeah. So that's the main thing that I've noticed. I really, really, personally for me, I really love how much encouragement there is in America. I think it's great. Yeah. If you get the right set of friends, they just want to see you win. And that's not as prevalent in the UK. If I could port something over, it would absolutely be that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it seems to me like they're both kind of extremes that way, though. You know, it's like it'd be nice if there was more of a happy medium, because I agree in that there's a certain sense of entitlement that you get out of that. Everybody's a winner and you can do whatever you want. And, you know, you're a hero. I mean, you see it on something as simple as, say, American Idol auditions, where, you know, these kids have been told their entire lives that they're amazing singers and they're fucking terrible. You know, and then they show up there and coincidentally you've got a Brit that goes on there and sweeps the fucking leg and tells them that they're garbage. On the same token, you don't want to crush somebody's spirit, especially as a young child. You know, so to me that there needs to be maybe a happy medium. Maybe that's where Canada comes in. I don't know. Probably not. What's the weirdest thing that we eat here that, like, back in England, you'd be like, what the fuck?
That is a really good question. I'm not sure about weird, but if I could bring one thing over, it would be Mexican food. Yeah, because the food that you often have is from the immigrants that you get into your country, and England doesn't have a lot of Mexicans. We do have a lot of good Indian food. If I could swap foods, if I could swap cultures, I would have the groundedness and the blue sky vision. If I could swap foods, I'd give you good Indian food and I'd take some Mexican food in return. Yeah,
that makes good sense. I assume you're a curry fan then?
Oh yeah, huge.
Is there a go-to spot in your hometown for good curry? Or
there's a place called My Deli. So I'm from Newcastle, which is the final city before Scotland. It's like where Winterfell was based in Game of Thrones. So it's kind of dark and cold and a little bit miserable. But we do have some really good legit spots. They just won Best Curry House in the UK on some BBC TV program.
Oh, really? Were you a fan of Game of Thrones?
Yeah. Well, the final season just feels like it tarnished everything for everyone, right?
How would you have liked to have seen it end?
Oh, God, I don't know. I'm not a writer.
Were you hoping she would have made it?
I don't know. I didn't care about the fact that she died. I think my problem was that I didn't see how Daenerys, like, she arrives at King's Landing and she sees the city, and then there wasn't enough foreshadowing that she might go completely crazy. Right, I know that the Targaryens were supposed to be mad, and that there was this sort of madness of the dragon and all of this sort of thing, and her brother had been a bit crazy, and there was a genetic pool the size of a fucking 5p piece. Like, I'm aware, right, that there was things sown, but way too many open loops. You know, what happened with Jack and Hagar, the dude that was training Arya? Why was it that all of the Dothraki got sent into battle, obliterated, and then somehow resurrected when she won and was holding her thing in front? Just a ton of holes, and it didn't feel satisfying to me. And it was all, it's such a shame as well. And you're now seeing the aftershock of that all of the different seasons that they've been thinking about releasing after this, it's in production, it's out of production, something's been cancelled or it's been postponed. I just think that there's a ton of problems in that franchise, which sucks because the first 5 seasons was probably the best TV that I've ever seen in my life.
No, I don't disagree with that in every way. I do think that it was almost like they just tried to finish it too fast. You know, it's like, this is the last season, and it's like they tried to jam too much shit in the last handful of episodes without really thinking about it. But maybe, I mean, who knows? Maybe it was a budget thing, or, I mean, you never know with those guys. But what is your normal morning routine when you are not traveling?
Wake up, morning walk.
What time?
Around about 7-ish, depends on what I've been doing. I was with Michael Malice last night discussing this recent school shooting until like 1 in the morning last night. So today was a little bit later. Get up, morning walk, come back. I don't have caffeine for about the first 90 minutes of the day. Salt in water, so element salt is what I use, but any normal salt will do you. journal, meditate, breath work, read, then get into the day. That's usually my perfect day. The one non-negotiable is the walk.
Really?
Yeah.
Rain or shine. How far or how long?
15 minutes. Around about.
Yeah. No music?
No. Silence, just thinking, just letting whatever thoughts come and go. It's like for somebody that doesn't have that as a part of their daily routine, and I understand that people have got kids and jobs that start at insane hours of the morning and things like that. But even 5 minutes, if you can just get out, even if you've got a garden, to get out and just do a couple of laps of the garden for 5 minutes, the difference that you'll feel is unbelievable. And I'd felt this in myself, right? So I'd done this for a long time because it was just something that I'd always done. And then since then, people like Andrew Huberman, who's a big sort of health and fitness podcaster, he's talking about how it downregulates the amygdalas. There's this thing called passive gaze that you have as you ambulate through the landscape, and it causes a whole bunch of things to occur that can help you. Sometimes most people wake up on certain days and they have this sort of ambient anxiety. It's the wrong side of the bed sort of scenario. Mm-hmm. And for me, going on the walk is like shaking the Etch-a-Sketch, and it just...
How long? I know you said you've been doing it a long time. How long have you been doing it?
5 years, 6 years, something like that.
Do you do that even when you travel? Like if you're at a hotel, you still go for... Really?
Yep.
That's cool.
Non-negotiable. Yep.
That's interesting.
What are the two key components for canine success? That's effective training and proper nutrition. Fueled by Team Dog brings those two components to your family and best friend. The perfect nutritional balance that results in a higher mental acuity, energy, overall vitality, and even an improved appearance. Every product you will find in my company's store was born from the battlefield and not from the boardroom. Let my life's work help you become your dog's hero.
All right, so you're from Newcastle originally. If you could just kind of give us a brief rundown on your childhood, siblings, what the overall experience was like, positive or negative.
Yeah, so I'm an only child, which I guess might show in that you then go and do a podcast, which is all about you interviewing other people. So the northeast of the UK is very much a working class area, spit and sawdust. The town that I grew up in was famous only for having the highest teen pregnancy rating in the UK.
Did you contribute to that?
I did not, but then it lost that title, sadly, so it didn't even have that after a little while, which was a shame. Yeah. State primary, state secondary, state sixth form, so very, very sort of normal working class upbringing. But always felt a little bit discordant when I was in school, bullied a good bit. I don't have the accent of where I'm from, despite being from the sort of same class. And always felt a bit isolated, and that was played upon more, I guess, by the fact that I was an only child. So you don't have that sort of team fallback support system that you would, and you're always under socialized too. There was maybe, I don't know, like just that Salt Bay guy, the guy that goes over with the steak and sprinkles it. I think it was like that amount of autism, like just that much. Like that was the amount of autism that I got. Yeah. Which I actually think is a competitive advantage. Like if you get the right amount. But so school was kind of a bit of a mystery to me a little bit. I was used to look at the kids and think about what it was that they were doing that was why they were popular or well liked. And I would fixate on strange things like the way that they tied their shoes, or the type of tie knot that they had, or the way that their hair was done, or the way that they held their bag. So I would always be trying to sort of deconstruct, like, what is it that's causing them? Because I want to have friends, and I don't feel like I have friends. And I didn't ever realize that it was the fact that they were able to connect with people because socially there was pretty well settled. So that was just generally looking back, I guess, like an interesting formative experience. And then I went to university. College was good. So that would, for us, college is 17, 18 years old. Went to uni and then started running nightclubs. And that sort of really pivoted my life and changed the direction.
Yeah. You mentioned you don't have the accent of that area. I find, and I'm curious, to me, the differences in accent within the UK are much more subtle and nuanced than they are, say, in the United States, where you've got Boston versus Midwest versus South versus California. Like those are pretty distinct. Do they seem that distinct to somebody from the UK where it's like, oh, yeah, that guy's from there, and it's way different? Or Is it just because like we don't hear it that much, where it doesn't seem like, it just seems like it's much more of a slight difference?
If I was able to lay you out a selection box of a bunch of different accents and I was able to put them in front of you, I think that you would go, oh, holy fuck, yeah, I didn't know about these people. Yeah. So Newcastle, where I'm from, which is where our equivalent of Jersey Shore was filmed, that's very distinct. Liverpool, where Darren Till is from, the UFC fighter, super distinct. And that's only 200 miles away. The fascinating thing you have in the UK is because the population density of the UK is 10 times that of the US. Right. So we've got 1/5 or less than 1/5 the number of people, but 10 times the population density. So it's just so crammed together on this tiny little island, which means that you can travel for 50 miles and have a very, very different accent, which is really, really fascinating. And everything's just super, super condensed. So, yeah, I would be able to lay you out a smorgasbord of British people, none of which sound like the sort of limey tea drinking fish and chips, like, oh, white governor, like none of them sound like that. They all sound like different versions.
Yeah, that's wild shit. Is there a food from back home that you miss the most, or that's like classically British that is kind of your jam?
There's some sort of homely stuff, I guess, shepherd's pie and Sunday lunch. We do better breakfasts than you guys. Our breakfasts shit all over America because, a full English breakfast is about as legit as it gets. And then...
What all is in that?
Yeah.
What all is in a legit English breakfast?
So you would go 2 fried eggs, couple of hash browns, streaky bacon, beans, mushrooms, maybe a sort of a grilled tomato slice. And then you're getting into that's sort of your foundation. And then you're getting into like adding little bits on the side. So you might have some more potato hash. You might have maybe some sort of corned beef. But that would be your basis to it. But it's not you don't get it in a fucking tortilla, right? It's not wrapped in something. It's not presented with, there shouldn't be anything green on your plate. For breakfast is the British way.
What is that? What do you call it? Stripy bacon? Stringy bacon?
Streaky.
Which is
streaky,
what?
So fatty.
Oh, I got you. Yeah. Not crispy, I take it?
I would go for grilled if I could rather than fried.
Yeah.
But
air fried's the ticket. All right. So you go through high school. It sounds like it's not the greatest experience, a little bit of bullying and not a lot of friends, but then you kind of enter the club scene. Was part of that because of the difficulty in high school and wanting to be in that more kind of popular in-crowd environment, or was that totally related?
I think a lot of the time when people don't understand how something works, especially socially, there's some advantages and some disadvantages. So one of the disadvantages is that you don't feel like you have a group of friends. One of the advantages is that by being on the outside of something, you can actually see how it operates. You can watch the dynamics more effectively. And I'd been watching social dynamics for a long time. And then I went to uni and I didn't really know about running club nights or how it worked. But all that you're doing when you're filling a club night is creating a vacuum or an attractor socially that appeals to a particular group of people and then encouraging that group of people to go to them. So I ended up being really, really effective at doing this. So very quickly, me and the first guy that I sat next to in my first ever seminar, who is still my business partner 16 years later, we both started doing the same thing, flyering, hi mate, where are you going tonight? Why don't you come to our nightclub? Like that sort of stuff. And within the space of a year, went from being sort of the lowest guys on the rung of the ladder to owning our own franchise. And that was really great. And that made me feel, for the first time ever, like I'd really, like I had a place, like people needed me, like people wanted me. And again, as with a lot of things, something that is adaptive and beneficial can often very quickly sort of become, it can twist into something that you really, really don't want, that it shouldn't be. And that was what I've found with myself. And a lot of people maybe as well, young guys specifically, who haven't had a role model or haven't had somebody to look up to or a linear trajectory. What happens is they finally find a little bit of success in life, maybe when they're, business or in a sport or perhaps with a relationship or something like that, that makes them feel whole. And they start to attach their entire sense of self-worth to that pursuit as opposed to their inputs toward it. So very quickly, my sense of self-worth was attached to whether the business was successful or not, whether the club nights that we were running were busy or not. So it wasn't about whether or not I'd done well. It was about whether or not the business was successful. But overall, it made me, for the first time ever, it made me feel sort of wanted and needed and competent, and like people cared about me and needed me. And whether they needed me because they actually wanted to need me, or they needed me because they just needed to get into the nightclub, I wasn't asking that question. I just wanted to be wanted.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a lot of that, with military folks as well. And I think a lot of industries, but I know for me personally in the community, within the SEAL teams, coming from that environment, is that attachment to that brand and that past or background is pretty all inclusive that way. And it's very difficult, I think, for a lot of guys once they leave any special operations community to kind of detach from that, that tends to serve as their identity, kind of for the rest of their life in a way. But is there a secret or kind of a key to success in terms of promotion, whether it's nightclubs or anything? Do you find a parallel promotion, like promotion is promotion, or is there something specific to it?
A few little quirks here and there, but principles that people can take that run their own businesses, that are trying to do anything that needs to garner attention, because that's what you're doing with a club night. It's people getting drunk in a room to music, right? Dress it up however you want. Put a DJ on, put nice dancers on, have a guy in an inflatable suit outside. Like it's people getting drunk in a room to music. So the product doesn't actually change all that much, which is interesting from a marketing perspective, because what you're doing is you're always playing around with the like the intangibles, right? The ancillary stuff around the outside. A really great tactic, and I use this on the podcast, and everybody should start to use this. Human beings, they're anticipatory beings, right? What they're looking for is actually the event that's coming up, and they enjoy the anticipation of the event sometimes more than the event itself, which is really interesting. So what you can do is you can use this to your advantage, and you can draw out a very protracted build-up sequence towards the launch of anything. And I found this with the show, but we would do, let's say we were going to launch a new club night in September. We would begin to do a teaser campaign that something new was coming in June. And then there would be a teaser about the announcement. Then there would be an announcement which would actually say what it was going to be and when it was going to be, that would begin to count down. And it would be this very, very sort of long, protracted thing. And it would just get people's attention. People need something to look forward to. People want shit to look forward to. That's why they plan holidays. That's why they go to festivals. That's why they book shows and stuff like that. And we realized that this is a really good hack. And similarly for the show, if I've got a big guest, I had Jordan Peterson on earlier this year, which is a really great episode, actually. And if any of the guys that are listening, we can put the link in the show notes or something. They can go and check that out. That's a really good episode if they want to sort of get an intro to modern wisdom and what I do. That's a fantastic episode to listen to. And I spent 2 months building up this episode with Jordan. And by the time that it actually came, people were really excited because they'd look forward to it. Yeah. They were drawn on a journey. And if you're launching a business, if you've got any sort of project that you want people to care about, take a bit of time, look at the timeline, think about, okay, can I get 6 weeks out of this? Can I say that there's something cool coming? And then when it's here, that, and then maybe there's some more things I can release over time, like a logo or a menu if it's a restaurant, or some special guests if it's an event or whatever, like really draw it out. And that to me seems to be a great hack that pretty much anybody can use to get more attention to something that they want to launch. Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think the tricky part is sticking with it. I know, for me in this show or any of the other, companies that I deal with, it's planning it all out and being, I think, disciplined enough to follow through with it and continue to do so. But Mike, can I ask you? I need to ask you, man. Like, we're talking the day after this Texas school shooting thing, and obviously having been in the special forces, how do you? I've never been in America when something like this has happened before, right?
Yeah.
It was very, very strange to read that news story and realize that it was within probably 100 miles of Austin, 120 miles, 150 miles. Very, very strange. Given the fact that you are probably much more desensitized to any of this sort of to any war crimes or violence than most people, how does it feel to you, to read a story like that? It looks like 19 children dead, one teacher, a couple of policemen injured. How does it feel to you when you read a story like that?
Well, I would say that the being desensitized to carnage, while that's a factor, it does not negate my empathy as a father I have kids, two of them. They're older than that age range, but they were that age range once. The thought of being a parent and experiencing something like that is impossible to wrap my mind around. What I also think is that kind of a number of things is that oftentimes emotions drive reactions, and typically when the higher the emotion, the less logic people use. I'm a huge data guy, right? And it's easy for, whether you can talk about abortion, you can talk about drug overdose deaths, you can talk about school shootings, you can talk about really anything. To me, the important thing is to remove emotion. I talk about it, that at length in my book is removing emotion, remove religion, remove politics when you go into any type of conversation. And I don't think this is any different. I think that you can have empathy and be devastated about something, but still look at it logically. In that, I think it's evil. I think it's a goddamn Greek tragedy that something like that happened, that somebody is capable of doing something like that. But I also fear that people respond when things like that happen very emotionally, and it's not to take away from 19 kids losing their lives in a school setting, and especially I think where the nature with which they lost their life is what drives people to react differently than they would, say, if those were drug overdoses, right? Because more than 19 kids die every day, of drug overdoses, way more than that. And for that matter, even take school shootings, a statistic that I have in my book when talking about guns, backyard pool drownings. More kids of that age range die drowning accidentally in backyard pools, right? But nobody is screaming for concrete trucks to come in and fill everybody's backyard pool. And nobody needs a fucking swimming pool, right? You hear that all the time. Nobody needs an AR-15. Nobody needs a this or a that. This country isn't about what people need. To me, what this country needs is a government that is set up to protect everybody's freedom to the best of their ability, and with great freedom comes great responsibility. And so, no question about it. It's an absolute tragedy for shit like that to happen. And I wish that it didn't. A lot of times people ask, well, how do you think that you fix that? And I think, there's not a one solution answer to it. It's an onion approach, and that there's a number of layers. We could spend hours talking about the handful of different solutions that I think collectively would contribute to making it, from a percentage standpoint, a lot less likely for these things to be able to happen. But that's a several-hour conversation in and of itself. To your question, I think it's sickening. It is tough to hear, and it's hard not to have a wildly emotional response to something like that, because you can empathize with those parents. You can put yourself in a classroom and, as a fly on the wall, and think how fucking terrified those other kids must have been. And even the ones that lost their lives, the last moments of their life, how terrifying that must have been, and how shitty of an experience, that unquestionably that is to go through. And so I wish that stuff like that didn't happen. I wish that people didn't have that type of evil in their heart. But I also, I don't like to see, people have knee-jerk emotional responses to stuff like that, and springboard off of the emotions in terms of the response from situations like that, and now make these super drastic changes that are in my opinion overcorrections.
You see this with any situation now, right? Everything is a political football to be kicked around.
Well, most things are. I will say the one thing that's strangely not. There's two things: opioid overdoses and child sex trafficking. I don't see either side blaming the other or using that as a political pawn to try to score points against the other side. Both of those are far more detrimental to our society than school shootings and gun deaths are by over 10x. And yet neither side really says much about either of them.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's two main reasons. Well, it essentially boils down to one reason, I think, is that there's too big of an involvement. from people in those circles, both that are addicted to opioids or like them and use them. And I think that child sex trafficking and that type of mentality seems like it's fucking pervasive in the higher ups of elitism and higher government officials. There's statistics that talk about the number of people from the House of Representatives on up that have been involved in scandalous situations like that our tax dollars have actually paid to basically cover it up or settle out of court. And it's astronomical, and those things are never talked about. So, my opinion is that it's too close to home. And so neither side wants to really do anything about it because they're too involved in it.
There's now
you're interviewing me.
I know. Yeah, well, I'm interested in what you've got to say. I think this is very timely, and as someone that you're right, as an affinity with carnage.
Well, I don't know that I have an affinity with it. I certainly have some experience with it, but I'm not so desensitized to it that it doesn't affect me. If I see a nasty accident, my heart rate goes up, and I don't have the EMT, or emergency room doctor response to people getting their heads, cut off in a traffic accident like that. That still rattles me. Maybe not as much as somebody who's never seen any of that, but I'm not so desensitized to where it doesn't affect me,
Douglas Murray, guy that wrote War on the West and Madness of Crowds. I had him on my show not long ago, and he told me this story about Christopher Hitchens. We were talking about the fact that in life, a lot of the time, you have to make difficult decisions. You need to make a choice between two different things. And, when we're discussing anything to do with gun control or response to an event or anything that has particular decisions in. He told me this story, Christopher Hitchens, one of the new atheists, and said it was after a talk that they'd both given, or they'd been on a panel or something. You can imagine it's probably in some dark and dingy London gentleman's club, and Hitch will be there with a corduroy shirt on and the sleeves are rolled up, and it's probably on a Chesterfield leather couch, and he's sort of lying back with a scotch in his hand, probably smoking, probably got 2 cigarettes, chain smoking. And Douglas is talking about the fact that he needs to make decisions, and every time that he makes a difficult decision, there's a trade-off that needs to be paid, right? For this decision, I have to let go of this, and for this decision, I have to let go of the other. Apparently Hitch turned and he sipped his drink, and he looked at Douglas and he said, "Douglas, in life, we must choose our regrets." I was like, fucking hell. Choose our regrets. What does he mean that we have to choose our regrets? I really thought about this for ages. And I really whenever there's a difficult decision or whenever there's a contentious topic, I always think about choose our regrets. I was like, okay, so what he means is that regrets are an inevitable part of life, right? That they're baked into the fabric of reality. It's not, regrets aren't some sort of bug, they're a feature, right, of the way that we exist. And because we have opportunity cost, by doing a thing, we don't do another thing. That means that even if we made the absolute optimal decision, we can still always wonder about the one that we didn't make. And I'd always look back on decisions that I'd made in the past, and if I had regrets, I would always say, well, that's because I didn't quite optimize the decision appropriately. If I'd only made a slightly better decision, I could have got rid of the regret entirely. I was like, oh, hang on a second. It seems like that's not the case. It seems like even having made the perfect decision, regret would still be a part of this. I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. But what does it mean that we have to choose our regrets? What about the choosing bit? Okay, well, a lot of the time when you're trying to make a decision, what you're trying to do is sort of optimize for what you want to happen. But given the fact that regrets are inevitable and that they're a baked in part of everyday life, maybe a better way to look at difficult decisions is to think about which regret you could live with and which regret you couldn't live with. Because given the fact that you have to choose your regrets, you then have to think, okay, well, which of these do I want to choose? I have to choose a regret. I can't not have a regret, right? I'm going to think about whether I should have gone to the theme park or gone to the gym. And then in retrospect, always the gym. It's always the gym, especially up against a theme park. But which regret do I want to live with? You know? And whenever a big decision like this comes out, I always think like, you know, in life you have to choose your regrets. Which is the regret that you want to live with?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think another way to look at that, and I think, most or a lot of people may see that as a pessimist viewpoint of saying the lesser of two evils or choose your regrets. But that is the reality of it, is that I think most times or oftentimes in life, decisions aren't easy. They're not black and white. There's not a clear cut, yeah, this is the best decision, gym versus theme park. That's a pretty easy black and white one, right? But most of them aren't that boiled down and that simple. And there is a bite out of a shit sandwich that you're going to have to take on one of them. And which one can you take a bigger bite of and swallow it easier? But I am curious, in that same vein, same question to you. What are your thoughts, having come from the UK, where there's such a disparity, Second Amendment and gun ownership wise?
Well, the gun conversation in the UK simply isn't something that we have, right? And I understand, especially having spent a good bit of time here and a lot of time speaking to people, mostly on the show more than actually being here. I find that conversations about the First and Second Amendment generally, like just amongst friends, tend to not happen unless it's like a real focused topic. Whereas on the internet, on my show, I'll tend to have conversations about that a lot more. Firstly, because we don't have guns, no one's talking about guns, right? I mean, you can't take away that which you don't have. And the tyranny of the government and all of that sort of rhetoric, the UK generally is a little bit less, I want to use something else, but the closest word I can think of is conspiratorial. Like there are fewer concerns about nefarious government overreach and things like that. Now, you could say that's, fortunate naivety, that you're just sort of living with blinkers on. And a lot of my American friends would probably accuse me of that. However, it's simply not a discussion. When it comes to free speech and stuff like that, I mean, you'll know that there's an online hate crime bill, which was tried to be passed in the UK, which made it a criminal offense to say nasty things on the internet. A guy was jailed. Count Dankula was jailed briefly for teaching his dog to do a Nazi salute. That was a particularly egregious example. For anybody that's interested in history, by the way, Count Dankula has an amazing YouTube channel where he just takes hardcore guys from history. It's called Absolute Mad Lads. And he'll do a 1 hour breakdown of some of the most ruthless leaders from history. And he's a fantastic historian, but he's a comedian. He taught his bug to do and there's people who've been jailed for tweeting rap lyrics, and all sorts of other bits and pieces. But those are, for the most part, really, really like malignant. And the amount of outcry that people push back against, you get social enforcement of this, and that sort of stuff doesn't really fly because the internet. So the thing which is perhaps facilitating people to do this stuff is also the enforcement mechanism, which stops people from, stops the government from overreaching too much, because people go, hang on a second, this is absolutely insane. And you will get the British. We're not as quick to riot as American, or at least some parts of America, but we're good at protests. Like, we'll happily get a picket fence up and do stuff. So it's, for the most part, I don't think I have a sufficiently sophisticated stance. I also don't really have a dog in the fight yet. I just got my O1 visa, so I'm going to be here. I can come and go as much as I want for the next 3 years, which is great. So I guess I probably do need to actually really think quite closely about my stance on it. I mean, I'm not going to be voting, so again, I don't really have an actual dog in the fight. But it's strange coming from a country that doesn't have guns to one where the conversation gets thrust into the headlines at least every couple of years with an event like the one that we saw yesterday. And I think it felt a lot more real to me yesterday, having been here and realizing that, I kind of call this place home, at least now. Oh. What does that mean? What does it mean to me that 19 kids lost their lives and I don't know about guns? I mean, I've shot guns. I've trained in firearm safety, but I've not been in a war zone. I've never been in a situation where that's happened.
Yeah. Again, I think really pick a political topic. I think, data serves as a good, simmering down on all sides, is that really is what tells you the severity of whatever the issue is that you're talking about, and pick anything, whether it's, again, abortion, drugs, prostitution, child sex trafficking, the border, you name it, opioid deaths. I mean, they're all for that matter, the killing of unarmed black individuals in this country. Similarly, like if you look at data, and I think sometimes people say, well, if you look at the data, it minimalizes those. No, all statistics are a representation of the severity of a problem. And to me, where I take a huge issue with our nation's media is in that cherry picking of things that they're outraged about or not. And again, like is the number of 19, a significant enough number, to compare to some of these other things that are again taking the lives of the same age range of kids in much, much higher numbers. Does that take away from the deaths of those 19 children? No, it doesn't. Again, I'm a father. If that had been one of my kids, I wouldn't be any less devastated. I also wouldn't feel any different about firearms than I do right now. And it's not even that I'm, this huge gun nut that has this crazy fucking arsenal. I don't, and I'm not. I have some, and I'm proficient because of my background, and I have a concealed carry permit, and I carry on a regular basis. In that same vein of data, I think it's imperative to look at death rates. Whether you take the UK, you take Australia, you take, pick a country, is that the overall murder rate per capita, that there's not a huge difference country to country. And so to me, it's scapegoating one tool over the potential for tens of thousands of other tools to accomplish that same goal. Is that if your goal is to kill children, there are a number of ways that sick fuck could have done that. The gun is but one way. Taken in France here a few years ago, where there was a few different terrorist activities that involved trucks. Where they drove through populated centers and killed dozens of people with a rental truck. So to me, what frustrates me the most about it is two things. One is that emotional based response that now that people cling on to, and this happens on both sides, whether it's nasty abortion videos that get published and the right uses them to try to outlaw X, Y, and Z, or the left with this, or pick a topic. But is that they cling on to that and they use that to further their political agenda. But I think even further than that is that they're letting emotions drive decisions, and if you've ever been in an argument with a spouse or a significant other, it's easy to understand where, high levels of emotion don't usually translate to the best decision-making process, and so I hate to see that happen. And it frustrates me as somebody who's, put my life on the line for the freedoms that this country enjoys. I would like to see those freedoms maintained. But one thing that I am curious, I guess, kind of in the same vein of the Second Amendment and shootings kind of dovetailing into the political scene here versus where you're from. What is your take on our political process versus where you come from and the contrast?
So when the US coughs, we usually catch a cold in the UK, which unfortunately means that we're kind of tangentially linked to whatever it is that goes on, which also means that we have to be kind of a little bit invested. So, we had Black Lives Matter protests occurred in 2020 after the killing of a person that wasn't even on the island or the continent where we live, right? Like a person died and then that happened. So first off, our politics, at least culturally, has started to look more like your politics, for better or worse. Yeah. I think that I would be tempted to say that America as a country is too big. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a problem that you guys are going to continue to come up against. I think that you've basically taken an entire continent with 50 different countries in it that all happen to speak the same language and get them to share the same currency. And you're trying, there is a line at the moment where it's trying to be governed underneath one sort of global, one local trade bloc, basically, kind of like the EU. And it happens to be that everybody can say that we are part of the same country and we're patriotic and blah, blah, blah. But when you have the 330 million people spread across a huge landmass, including some other bits that are kind of separated out, it's very difficult to coordinate those people, especially culturally, right? Mm-hmm. And the fact that you happen to identify as being from the same country. Now, in the age of atomization of the individual and the internet, where you can find your own niche group to make friends with, and you don't actually have to be bonded to your local community, which means that communities don't have to be bonded to communities, states to states, and countries overall. I think it's becoming increasingly difficult to glue together a country of this size. Now, I would love to see America succeed at doing this, but all of the discussions about secession and the splitting up of the states and stuff like that, I think that is a function of the fact that it's really, really difficult to try and govern a country that's as big as this, with as many people as this.
I agree 100% with you, with one exception, which is I think that we've grown into that, and not even size-wise. I mean, landmass-wise, it's been the same. Yes, our population has fucking doubled in the last 50 years, but I think the key is, just like you saw with this recent Supreme Court decision, is kicking things back to the states as much as possible is the secret to that happy medium. Is that, the more things are federalized on every fucking level, the harder it is to maintain and control and have a cookie cutter, one size fits all policy approach to all these different 50 places. Because I agree, it is very much like the EU. There are states that are bigger than some countries in Europe. There's a number of them, and so to me, that is the answer. I think we should and can continue to be the United States of America, but there needs to be a concerted effort on a federal level to delegate as much as possible back to the individual states and having them decide, how they run things. The more you take the Department of Education as probably as clear cut of an example as I can provide, there's a correlation between the early 80s when the Department of Education was in full swing, where now there's all these federally mandated policies as it relates to elementary through K through 12, basically. And there's a direct parallel of the more that ramped up and the more that the federal government was involved in that primary education time frame, that we as a nation have spiraled down a fucking drain as it relates to our ranking internationally with how we compete with all these other countries. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse. So
the way that I've seen it, watching from the outside and now having a little bit of a foot in the inside for the last sort of 3 months since I've been here, I do wonder whether America has sort of lost its cultural hold on. There was a period for a big chunk of the 1900s, which was when we had the highest population growth on the planet and also the highest sort of cultural improvement as well. You were able to broadcast what was going on. And that really feels like what you've ended up with was a formative set of years where America was the leader in culturally, economically, and having seen what's happened over the last few years, like who's looking at America and thinking, oh, wow, like they've really got it all held together. And a theory that I've had in my mind for a long time, I've had a lot of Russian disinformation and Chinese long-termist strategists on the show talking about what it is that they're planning on doing. So I see there's sort of two ways that the current cultural soup that America is in could have been caused through. One of them is that it is the seeds have been sown from foreign agents who have tried to encourage America to become self-hating. So this is the topic of Douglas's new book, The War on the West. The most interesting type of anti-Westernism is the anti-Westernism that comes from the West itself, right? The call is coming from inside of the house. And has this been sown and amplified by foreign agents, right? That's one way that it could be. The biggest pro-Black Lives page on Facebook before Black Lives Matter was started at the Internet Research Agency in Russia, and it was operated by them. And they were running events, real-life events in America with real people, real Americans going to it, being run by Russia. You go, oh my God. That's the first one. The second option is that it isn't due to them. And that this is just America as a culture turning around and kicking the ball into their own goal over and over again. And if you're China or Russia or North Korea or anybody else that wants to see the United States fail, you're looking at each other going, was that us?
Yeah.
No, you're kidding. They're doing that to themselves.
Yeah.
Both of those solutions are terrifying. It's like the solution to the Fermi paradox. Where are all of the aliens? It's either they're everywhere or they're nowhere. And both of those are pretty scary.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think it's both. I think that to me, it's kind of like one of those steel ball and the string things that goes back and forth almost, in that, all it takes is a little bit of a nudge from these outside actors to get us to kind of eat our own and turn on each other. And they just, are kind of on the outside poking the bear here and there and ensuring that.
How is it that America's so fragile? Or
I think we're a victim.
Stable.
Yeah, I think it's that we are a victim of our own success, that we've been too powerful and successful for too long, to where that adage of, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, that we are experiencing the detriment of that. We are in the good times create weak men phase of that vicious cycle. And so, to me, when you live in a population where people can try to sue each other over not using the correct or preferred pronouns, or enacting legislation based on shit like that, or rioting over some of the things that people riot over, and burning shit to the ground, and I would say the overall general mean collective average of things that people are outraged about are total bullshit, and it's a result of us having the flexibility and frankly the luxury of being pissed off about things that don't really matter. Human beings are created to endure and to suffer to a certain degree, and to overcome. And when our own success removes so much of that inherent environmental struggle and need to overcome certain challenges goes away, we as a society create them because they have to exist, or good without the context of bad isn't fucking good anymore. If you love ice cream, you can eat too much of it. If that's all you eat, it starts to suck. It'll make you sick, and now you'll hate it. And I think that's kind of the throes of the double-edged sword that we've found ourselves in, and that we've been too good for too long. And now we're an entitled, spoiled brat, that doesn't know how to fucking deal with our own fucking feelings and emotions in a lot of ways.
I'd be tempted to agree. So there's two interesting elements here. I think it's called the Tocqueville paradox when you combine that with concept creep. So as living standards in a particular society rise, a lot of the time people's expectations of those standards rise with them. But very quickly, the expectations can start to outstrip the growth in the standards themselves. Yeah. So what you end up with is a society that, even though living standards are objectively getting better, people aren't, their expectations of that continues to increase. And then when you marry that with concept creep, which is that a lot of the time what you have to see with things like racism or sexism or any type of social concern, a lot of the time people aren't looking to detect that. They're trying to find a waterline that they want the level of this event to occur at, or the frequency in terms of the data. And what they're going to do is continue to expand the definition of that to maintain that water level. So it's not about measuring with this, it's about changing the definition in order to keep that level the same. So you can imagine if you ever increase the expansion of what it constitutes for someone to use hate speech, that you can keep hate speech at the same level, but it needs to be an ever expanding definition. When you combine those two things together, the concept creep with the Tocqueville paradox, what you end up with is a situation where people are ever more sensitive to ever less problematic issues in the world. And, on top of that as well, you just think, well, the world is super convenient. I think that the fact you can Uber Eats a Michelin star meal to your house while you Amazon Prime, whatever, and air conditioned send your kids to school in the car, all that stuff is fantastic. But I do think that there's definitely something which has been sort of lost, and that would be something like sort of spiritual satisfaction, right? A sense of connection to the grand, less of a rational, cerebral solution to the world, community, locally. Perhaps this would have probably been very heavily served by religious services and going to faith-based traditions and stuff like that in the past. And now people are looking for a way to fill that slightly less objective hole with problems that can be described using the more sort of prescriptive, real-world, rational stats that we're looking at.
No, I agree 100%. I'm going to make an analogy in that same vein. You do MMA and grappling and stuff with some of the guys in Austin, right?
Yes.
The types of workouts that you do with those guys, similarly to some of the experiences I've had with, former teammates that I went through SEAL training with and such, there is a certain bond that you create with people that you go through really, really difficult experiences with, correct?
Yes.
One that comparatively to people that you maybe just have a professional relationship, it's vastly different. It's much stronger. It's much more authentic. There's a lot more emotional investment in it. There's just a much stronger, tighter kind of soul agreement with this person than you have with really anybody else, even your own family members, blood in a lot of cases. To me, it's kind of that same thing, is that there's such a lack of that now, right? Where very few people have that type of bond with people because their lives are so fucking easy in every other way that it almost dehumanizes everybody else.
So why was it the case? I've asked myself this a ton of times. Why was it the case that when COVID started and everybody on the planet was suffering the same unknown future, ambient anxiety, there's this invisible killer out there. We don't know if it's a 10 or a 20% mortality rate, especially sort of that March, April, June period of 2020. Mm-hmm. I thought that perhaps that would be a species bonding event, right? Who was that famous president that said, can you imagine how quickly our differences would be forgotten if we were attacked by an alien foe?
I think it was, I want to say was it Ronald Reagan? Maybe it was Kennedy. I know that there was a question asked to a Russian president. It escapes my mind, but I know what you're talking about. In that he asked, hey, if aliens invaded us, would you have our back? And they're like, well, fuck yeah, we would, or whatever. And that was the start to a negotiation. But to your question, I think it's that, for that first, the first 15 days that turned into 2 years, that 15 days, I think that was the case. Very quickly, most people realized, even if it was subconsciously, that it wasn't nearly as big of a deal as it was being made out to be, or that they thought it might be. And then that's when it turned into people, honestly killing each other over not wearing a fucking mask or not, and you saw this weird shift of all these different, very, very strange, almost mental illness-like ideologies that people had on both sides of that fence, to where, again, people are dehumanizing each other over really, really stupid little things, because, again, there's nothing else to really consume them that's of worthy mention. But
I really hope, I'm big into existential risk, right? The different ways that humanity could go extinct and how we can avoid them. And an engineered pandemic or a natural pandemic are two of the really big ones in terms of the likelihood over the next 100 years by the people that know what they're talking about. And I'd really, really hoped that in the same way that we ended up getting a vaccine to try and defeat the virus, that the actual virus itself, in terms of what it did to humanity, would kind of be like an inoculation against people not understanding that this is a really, really serious problem. Potential leaks from BSL-4 labs, like the highest security lab that you can get. Smallpox has got out of there. Anthrax has got out of there. Potentially COVID-19 has got out of there. These are the highest security that you can get. And okay, that's a big problem. Mm-hmm. Another big problem is global coordination. What does it mean for us to be able to get? We can't get PPE, right? You can't get enough of the protective equipment that the doctors need to be able to do this. What does it mean that you can't shut down flights, that governments can't coordinate? This is a big deal. Say what you want about Bill Gates. He was talking about this 10 years ago. He was saying, and if you dig into the actual literature around the books, accessible books by people like Nick Bostrom and Toby Ord, New York Times bestsellers, saying like, this is a big problem. People should pay attention to this. Yeah. So I hoped that this would be like look, warning sign, need to be careful. You have an interdependent entire species now. This isn't isolated anymore. People aren't air gapped from each other because they can't build longboats that can do more than 100 miles across the ocean, right? Like, this isn't safe. So what do we need to do? What are the protections that need to be put in? Blah, blah, blah. Nah, not happened. It's just not a solution. That's not what's come out of this. And it didn't bond us together. And maybe you're right. Maybe in the same way that you could give somebody like a dose of a vaccine that was too low, that it didn't actually instigate an immune response. Maybe because COVID ended up being whatever it is, like 0.5% mortality or something like that, that it simply wasn't enough of a punch in the face in terms of suffering, that it didn't cause. But you go, okay, so I mean, at what point do we need to lose 30% of the globe's population in order to do this?
Yeah, I think so. Take 9/11 is that, similarly, is that if you look at 9/12/2001, look at the unity that existed in this country, and it did for years. But to me, I think that serves as a really good example in that the human condition, or just people generally speaking, need almost a constant or recurring threat, existential threat, whether it's self-imposed or it's exterior, or even if it's fucking perceived for that matter, is that there has to be a real feeling of threat, that there's a united front for people to unite and do that. Otherwise they will find reasons to fight amongst each other.
There was a really great article that I read the other day about population collapse. And I've thought about existential risk for ages. And one of the things that I've never thought of, is such a smart way to put it. So you mentioned the fact that with an existential risk, with most of them, right, it's smog-filled skies, it's the upcoming asteroid, it's the super volcano that's just about to erupt, it's the AI that's on the cusp of self-reliance or
Terminator
whatever.
2.
Yeah, exactly. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger naked
Skynet.
in the middle of a car park punching someone in the face. And those are very easy to rally against because they're so obvious, right? It's a thing that you see. Whereas population collapse there's nothing to fight against. It's just this sort of slow and then increasingly less slow curve that you fall off the end of. And thinking about that, you're right. Humanity works best. Groups cohese together when they're working against something. And the thing, it needs to be something that they can see and feel and hear and fear.
Yeah. And communicate.
Yep.
To each other about. To me, that also begs the question from kind of almost an evolutionary or really 30,000 foot view standpoint, is what role does Mother Nature play in making its own corrections as it relates to the human species? Is that if you look at the history of the planet, we're not the only actor in town, and we're also not smarter than Mother Nature. Yeah, like, there's been some ridiculously amazing advancements in science and medical technology. But the fact is that Mother Nature is still the queen bitch, and if she decides there's too many of you fuckers on the planet and I'm going to cut that number in half, she'll find a way to do it, so to me, like, people don't ever want to talk about population control. And I brought this up on a recent episode I had, and I'm not advocating for that. I have kids. I've repopulated the planet, to a certain extent. Yeah. And so I'm never going to take the approach, nor am I naive enough to think I have any business telling anybody that they should or couldn't have kids or what have you. However, the fact is the planet is only so big. There are only so many resources, and no matter how efficient and streamlined any of these life processes are, the fact is that there comes a critical mass threshold point at which there just isn't enough for everybody. And I feel like we're kind of at that point, where as we continue to grow, it gets to where things become a problem. I recently flew here last week, which I fly as little as possible because I hate it. But I flew out of Dallas, and then I flew into a really fucking small airport. And one of the biggest things that stuck out to me was the difference in temperament and personality of the TSA agents at those two airports. It was night and fucking day.
How so?
And in how they treated people, their temperament, their attitude, their overall positivity or lack thereof.
Dallas was less so.
Yeah, the bigger and more congested and populated and chaotic and dynamic and stressful environments are, you see that reflection in all the people that are in those environments. Take toilet paper during the COVID shutdowns, right? People are killing each other over fucking Charmin, stupid shit, and anytime you go to a really small town, what's kind of the first thing you notice and people talk about? It's the slow pace. Yeah. Toilet paper. It's the pace of life. Everything slows way the fuck down. I think human beings are more meant to be in that environment. And like you said, the country is too big. The fucking planet's too big. The population is too big. We're at a point where like you can't find places to get away almost anymore, and that has a detrimental mental impact on human beings in a way that I don't think this planet has ever come across. If you look at the inception of the human race all the way up until now, like we're living in uncharted territory in so many ways, not just the obvious technological advances, but in population. There's more people alive now than there ever has been, and by a lot, and that has impacts on people to where you see this rat race. There was a study not long, the study was kind of brought back to life. It's been a few decades since it was done with mice in this, populated community environment where it would get to a certain number where that exact thing starts happening, as they start killing each other over basic resources that, like there's just all kinds of crazy shit. There's a collapse basically of the population of this community of rats based on once it got to a certain number. And I really do feel like that's kind of where we're at as a species is that we've created a population and an environment where we're going to start killing ourselves because of all of these factors. But
so there's a couple of really interesting bits here. First one, there's a great blog post by Scott Alexander that taught me this thought experiment. Imagine that you have an island with 1,000 rats on it. Right. And this island has tons and tons of room, tons and tons of resources. And these rats are able to indulge themselves in whatever they want to do. They can do art and poetry. They're very cultural rats. They can do whatever they want. They can do dance, and they can think, or they can get resources. They can build businesses. They can do whatever they want. Now, as the population begins to grow, what you start to see is that the rats who don't indulge in the non-essential pursuits of life end up being more effective. And you start to select for rats, not only culturally in terms of the sort of mimetic evolution, but also genetically in terms of the temperament of the rats downstream that tend to do that. So let's say that this island has a carrying capacity of 10,000 rats. Get towards the 10,000, and what you start to see is that fewer and fewer rats do art, because they actually need to spend more time just surviving and reproducing in order to not die. Then you get to the full carrying capacity, right? You hit 100%. What you have now is a situation in which any rat that chooses to do something which is non-essential to its existence is at a disadvantage, because every rat that chooses to not do that is going to survive and reproduce more effectively. So what you do is you end up with a civilization which is indeed bigger, but has competed away all of the things that gave it culture and color and difference in any case. And I think that you can see this, at least economically, with the fact that you now need a 2-parent household for the most part to support kids that are growing up and stuff like that. That what is it? Is it like real living wages have remained static since the 70s, something like that?
Yeah,
graphs that people can find that show that. You think, okay, well, I mean, that's a pretty shitty thought experiment, right? The fact that you can get to a stage where the requirement of what you have to do in the real world is so arduous that it actually competes away some of the things that kind of make life interesting and colorful and fulfilling. On the flip side of that, based on what I've read, and based on, again, this isn't my speciality, but based on the things that I've read, especially this most recent article, which seemed to be very well researched, you can create a graph that you can imagine is a perfect straight line in the middle. Coming out on both sides, you have men and women's ages, with the lowest age at the bottom and the highest age at the top. So what it actually gives you is a shape, right? It's a shape of the population. And what you want to have is a population that looks like a pyramid. You want a typical triangle. So you have more young than you do old, Reason being that young people are the ones that work, they're the ones that drive GDP, they're the ones that drive innovation, and they're the ones that look after the fucking old, right? So the interesting thing when you look at these graphs is you can actually see into the future, because you can't birth a 5-year-old, right? You can only ever birth people this year, and then you lock in the shape of the graph at that level for the rest of time. So this guy went through, and it's really, really great. It's called Mike from Pirate Wires. You can Google the population collapse article if you're interested. And what you see in a lot of countries is this ever-increasing pear type shape. So it's fat in the middle. But what's a pear when it starts to get a little bit older? It ends up becoming this inverted triangle where you have an ever-increasing number of old people, remembering that the healthcare and longevity in terms of lifespan, fantastic, great, right? But what drives GDP? What drives growth? What is it that people care for those that have come before them? So it looks like population might just glance off the bottom of 10 billion around about 2100. Just skim it. But you're way below replacement rate in everywhere except for Africa, basically. And the single biggest correlate, and this is really sort of uncomfortable thing to see, is that education of women seems to be one of the biggest determinants of this reduction in having kids, because women can go and do other things. You know, their sole sense of purpose doesn't come from having children. And think about this as a thought experiment, man. What if there is a choice that needs to be made on a population around whether or not women can derive a sense of meaning from something that isn't raising children, or you have a civilization that can't continue? Like, what if that's the choice? I really hope and don't think that it is. I think that there's probably a way that culturally you can kind of reignite the desire for people to actually have a family. You can put family back on a pedestal. You can reinvigorate marriage as an institution. I think that there's ways that you can fix this. But like, that's a potential thing that could happen.
Chris, are you telling women to get back in the kitchen? Is that what you just said?
I don't work for Burger King, so I wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
But my point being that...
Yeah. No, I hear you.
This population stuff is interesting and pretty fucking scary.
No, it is. I agree. To me, the big question that begs asking or figuring out, rather, the answer to is what is the right number, or is there one? You know, is there an ideal, ballpark number population wise, both in this country, the global population? Obviously, technology plays an enormous role on what that right number is. But I do think, to me, at least, it feels like most places that you go in this country, if I just compare it to, say, when I was a kid driving around, going on road trips versus what it's like now, it's vastly different. Everywhere is fucking busy, and it is. I mean, like, you can be in
that's not your sort of newfound fatherly disgruntledness. Like, when you become a dad, like,
there's no way that's not at least a part of it. Having said that, like, you can be in bumfuck Alabama at 2 a.m. and there's still tons of traffic on an interstate. You pull into a Pilot or a Flying J and it's fucking packed. Like, there's lines waiting to get gas. Like, it's unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. And just in the last few years, it's kind of grown into that. But to me, that's kind of the big question. I'd be curious, to ask you've had some really, really phenomenal guests on, and I love your show. But to ask some of those proponents of some of these studies, is there a magic number, or is there an ideal scenario where this is kind of the best case scenario, or the happiest medium of all of it?
That's a really good question. I think an interesting thing to ask would be, what are we optimizing for? If you're a pure utilitarian, you would say, well, the maximum number of people is the maximum amount of utility, because it gives the most number of souls or brains or minds or whatever the opportunity to exist. And hopefully, if you can continue. But I mean, what is that? That ends up with a world that has 100 billion people. It's until you run out of space, perhaps. And then you end up in like that Surrogates film with Bruce Willis, where we're all just in an armchair every day living in the virtual reality, pumped with MDMA through our eyeballs.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
I've got you mentioned about you mentioned about statistics. I've got an interesting, we've sort of touched on abortion a couple of times today. This is really, really surprising to me. So I put this in my newsletter a couple of months ago. Women vote to restrict abortion more than men. Polls consistently show that women are more likely than men to support a reduction on the abortion limit. 28% of men supported a reduction versus 46% of women. That was YouGov in 2011. 24% of men versus 49% of women. That was 2012. And then 35% of men versus 59% of women. And that was Angus Reid. And one of the synopsises of this sort of overall study was, this raises some pretty big implications. The most obvious being that if it were left to women to vote on the issue with men out of the picture, there's a good chance that the result would be in favor of restricting abortion. On the flip side, if only men voted, they'd almost certainly vote in favor of women's reproductive rights. And that was from The Guardian, which is a very progressive newspaper in the UK.
Well, I'm actually not that surprised by that, in that societally, there is a huge double standard with that, and by that, I mean, is that there's this huge progressive push in terms of, my body, my choice, and I get to decide. And, if you don't have a uterus, you don't get to fucking tell me anything, blah, blah, blah. And I am actually, politically, I'm much more of a pro-choice with everything, whether it's, your body, whether it's with your firearms, your house, your livelihood, your fucking taxes, whatever. Like I'm a big fan of just being left the fuck alone and on all fronts. However, to me, that there's this weird double standard in that a lot of times these groups push for this, I get to decide and fuck you, you don't have a say. However, if I go through with it, I get to hold you accountable. Right. And to me, it's like if you should null and void the capability or ability to hold the father responsible for something if you're not willing to let him have a say in it. To me, you shouldn't get it both ways that way. It's a little bit neither here nor there, but I do think that's relevant in terms of this study that you're talking about. I would say that that's probably why, is that, women, I think, even if it's subconsciously, are probably going to side with that more so from a protection standpoint than men will, because men want the ability to have that out.
They're still invested. Yeah. Well, I mean, this was one of the criticisms online that women, even pro choice women, said, see, this is an obvious demonstration of men's patriarchal overreach that they are trying to still control women's bodies by giving them access to abortion. So it's like, look, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't with this. Yeah. But I do think that you're right here. Another thing to consider is that during these debates, a lot of the time at the moment, especially in the US, but also in the UK, groups are pitched against each other, right? It's men against women. It's women against trans women. It's blacks against whites and Asians and Jews and whatever, right? Everybody's split up into these groups. And a lot of the time, people don't realize that they're not fighting that group. The call is coming from inside of their own fucking house, right? Yeah. So a bunch of things I've learned over the last couple of years. When it comes to slut shaming, right? The vast majority of slut shaming comes from women about women. Yeah. Why? Well, it's because slut shaming is a price enforcement mechanism to ensure that access to sex is no easier than any group of women wants to have. Like, slut shaming doesn't come from men for the most part. You could say that's because we've got this sort of nefarious investment again. Like, there's always ulterior motives to these things. But women have an investment in ensuring that the price of sex, if you're prepared to give a blowjob on the third date, Mike, that was you maybe. If you're prepared to give a blowjob on the third date, but I'm not prepared to until the fifth date, I want to raise your price up by having this sort of cartel enforcement mechanism, right? So slut shaming, where you think about seeing it online, like a lot of the time it would be like these men telling us what we can do with our sexual proclivities and such, like, okay, abortion. Again, like the finger gets pointed at men. You go, well, hang on a second. Think about pretty much every mother. As soon as you've had a child, I imagine, and I would be fascinated to find out, to get this studied, I imagine once you've had a kid as a mum, your view on abortion must at least be shaken a little bit. The magic of lying there with a newborn child on your chest, just oxytocin flooding through your body, and then all of the beautiful memories that you're going to get as you bring this kid up, right? Like, can you see abortion in the same light
Yeah, my guess is no. I think with most women, there's at least some shift in their thinking towards it. Yeah,
absolutely, there is. And then you pick whatever else it is that you want around these sort of topics, whether it be slut shaming, whether it be, and then when it comes to body positivity, the body positivity movement as well. You know, like most of the pressure that comes about women's appearance isn't coming from men. Like you're saying that the same guys that can't notice that they've got sauce on their shirt are also able to tell with unbelievable dexterity that there's like tiger stripe stretch marks on the side of your legs. Like, that's not our game that we're playing. That's girls' games that they're playing.
I mean, a quick tour of a pub or bar scene at 2 a.m. will tell you that guys aren't that picky about a lot of things. It's all fascinating stuff. I would kind of like to get as we wrap up here, your take, both life ethos, why, and kind of why you started the podcast and where you want to go with it.
For a long time, I didn't really understand how the world worked, or me. And that was a big question for me. We got halfway through my story about not really knowing where I was going or what I was doing. And I was searching for answers to how to operate in the world in a way that would make me feel fulfilled and connected. And I realized that the default desires that I had, the things that I wanted, or that I thought that I wanted, weren't serving me. And I wanted to find out what I should want. I wanted to know what I wanted to want and not just what I wanted. And I sort of settled on the fact that life should be lived by design, not default. That living intentionally and deliberately is the most important thing that I can find, because it's the first mover from which everything else comes, right? If you don't do that, the best thing that you can hope to be is a rich, successful, or famous slave, right? You're a slave to the confused chemical signals of your body, or the social norms, or the way that you've dealt with past traumas, or your fears, or your paths of least resistance, or all of that stuff. That's a miserable existence. So the goal with the show was, firstly, for me, I wanted to work out how to understand myself and the world around me. And then it's been 4 years, nearly 500 episodes. People like Jordan Peterson, Seth Godin, Ryan Holiday, Robert Greene, or, like world champions in thought and understanding yourself and designing a life. And after a little while, I realized, well, hang on a second, there's like a good-sized audience here of a few million people a month that are tuning in to listen to this. Well, okay, how do I both continue to sort of grow myself and then serve them in a way? I'd never really been in this sort of serving mode before. I didn't really know what that meant. I never really felt like a protector, presider, provider type situation. And then I kind of did, and that was also fulfilling. So that's it, man. Like the world has changed so much that the wisdom that we used to have no longer applies in the same sort of way. And yet the wise people of every generation discover the same truths. So what does it mean that some of the answers are already out there, and yet they need to be probably communicated and applied in a way which is a little bit novel and understands the current context that we're in? And I think that one of the advantages I have, I'm 34, but I spent all of my 20s as a bro, right? Like I was just a professional party boy. I was a professional party boy doing like chest and buys and then going to the nightclub and waking up and
skipping leg day.
Yeah, exactly. Like a decade. And I think that trying to really bring, your Jordan Petersons or your Robert Greenes or your Ryan Holidays or whatever, really trying to bring them down to earth and go, okay, like how does this grow corn? Like this is a great idea, but tell me, like, what does this mean for my life as a person who doesn't quite have a full grasp on how to operate in the world? And it seems to be working, man. Like people really seem to resonate with it. I love to do it. I love to have conversations like this and learn about different things. And for a long time, I never embraced my curiosity. I'm sure you can imagine, on the front door of a nightclub, you don't really have many opportunities to say, before you go in, mate, have you ever considered why it is that we're struggling to get a grand unified theory that can get quantum gravity and general relativity and mix them together? It's like, hi, mate, bye, mate, get in the club, mate. Like that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
So for a long time as a young person, I wasn't like embracing the person that I was fully, me. that was a big lesson. Okay, I want to live deliberately. I want to live by design, not default. I can do that through the show. I now have access to pretty much anybody on the planet that I want to speak to, which is a fucking blessing and blows my mind.
Yeah.
And then I get to have a conversation with them, and like a few million people a month tune in, and it makes their lives better as well. And it's all just part of this sort of journey thing that we're going on. And it is hard work, dude. Like, it's so much hard work. But it's worth it. Like, it really does feel like it's worth it. And I haven't done much before that's felt this much like it's worth it. And no one came out of one of my club nights and said to me, dude, do you know what it is? I was lost and alone and in an existential pit of despair. But man, when I had those 1 pound Jaeger bombs and I heard that banging hip hop music, dude, you changed my life. Man. Like, no one says that, but I get messages like that a lot. And I'm not doing it for the, showy triumph message to put it online, but it fulfilled me in a way, like, existentially, that I didn't know existed. It was like taking a drink when I didn't know I was thirsty. Oh, this is what purpose feels like. This is what fulfillment feels like. This is what actually creating a community and contributing to it feels like.
No, I think that's brilliantly put. You're a super fascinating guy. The show is awesome. I love your show, and I'm inspired by a lot of the guests that you've had on, and I'd love to have a number of them on mine as well. I couldn't agree more in that, to me, that age old question of, what is the key to happiness, or what is the meaning of life? To me, it's one word. It's purpose. It really is. No matter what that purpose is, the happiest people that I've ever met are people that have a legitimate reason to get up in the morning and do what they do. And, I have an interesting industry that I work in providing, personal protection dogs to high net worth folks, and I have for over a decade. And so
is that what the silhouette is on your hat?
So this one is the dog food treats and supplements company that I
thought it was a dog.
It is. So this is Team Dog, and then Tricos is the protection and police and military dog side. But it's interesting. I've had a lot of clients over the years that are all of significant means, and some of them are some of the happiest people and most fulfilled and purpose driven, pleasant people I've ever met in my life. And some of them are some of the most miserable, unhappy people I've ever met in my life as well. And to me, that money doesn't buy happiness thing is half right. Money doesn't buy happiness if you're not purposeful and fulfilled in what you do. If you are purposeful and fulfilled, money is going to absolutely fucking enhance that. Because that's the reality of it, is that money gives you freedom and flexibility to do what you want. And if what you're doing is something you legitimately love, then it's just going to magnify that. But awesome stuff, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Like I said, I love your show. I'd love to, if you ever find yourself in Dallas, I'd love to have a part 2, in person and go even further into some of these stuff.
I'm absolutely down.
So, well, thank you much. Anything you want to add where we can find you?
Yeah, so if people want to subscribe to the show, just search Modern Wisdom wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We'll put a link to the Jordan Peterson episode. I think that's probably a good place to start. So if people want to check it out, that'll be linked in the show notes below. And then I have a free reading list of 100 books that you should read before you die. It's totally free, and you can sign up if you go to chriswillx.com/books. That'll probably be in the show notes as well.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it. For you guys, the listener, thanks for tuning in. As always, I hope you enjoyed it. I know I sure did. And until next time, this is Mic Drop.